Thank you guys, as always, for attending the third episode of Collate in 30 at 30,000 feet. Today, we're going to be talking about that new trend. You've probably seen it on LinkedIn or Twitter, MCP. So really breaking down how you can leverage it with Collate, thinking about the Claude MCP specifically here. And then I've also introduced the PostgreSQL extension as part of this, just to show what MCP is really about. I see a whole lot of content on LinkedIn and on X, and they're just using X vendors MCP. But the whole point of the MCP is to have one place to do a lot of things. It would be remiss of me not to show those other extensions in tandem to the Collate, just as an any day user will use. This session is not geared to getting you started, with MCP or debugging or setting it up. This session is really surrounded about how you can leverage it. We do have some documentation and some great content on our site on how to set these things up. So if you are curious after, again, check out our docs page, check out our YouTube channel that we can share in the chat afterwards, where you can get some familiarity and start doing this yourself. Also, I will be in Collate for today's Collate in 30 at 30, but a lot of what I'm going to be showing, if not everything, is possible in OpenMetadata as well. I know we probably have some folks that are from the OpenMetadata community trickling in here as well, that might be curious on how they can leverage it. And I'll use both of these windows here. On the right, I do have my Claude MCP up, my Claude agent using Claude Sonnet 4. And then on the right-hand side, I have my Collate instance, as well as just some Postgres, just so you can see it is real and what we're going to be navigating. So setting the scene, Collate, it's a unified platform for data discovery, data quality, and data governance. So those are the things I definitely want to talk about: how we can discover a specific PostgreSQL customer table, how we can analyze the data of that table using that PostgreSQL extension here in Claude, and then thinking about ways we can govern and define, and then have that quality component and create a test case, all within this MCP window that I have on the left. So looking at Collate, some of us may or may not be familiar. The last two episodes of this series was really giving a foundational level. So if you're new to Collate, definitely encourage you guys to watch these episodes as a little series on your Friday night or Saturday evening. Instead of Netflix, watch these series. It would be about an hour and a half. It'd be a good little movie there. But let's think about what we want to do. Typically, if you wanted to find something, an asset, you can do one of two things. You can go directly to the data source and just find the technical data, knowing no context whatsoever about this customer table. So I know it's the first name, the last name, and some elements like this, but there's no comments, there's no owners, there's no domains, there's no glossary terms, there's no standardization. It's just a table. And yeah, I can do my own SQL execution and things on this table and start getting familiarity, but I still have to come here, and then I would also have to go to Collate this customer table to understand it better, and I'm now jumping around a lot. Instead, I just want to come to Claude, and I want to discover what's out there. And I would ideally like to show me a specific command, maybe. Show me the customer table in the Postgres database service. So this is showing me the domain owner of Joe Perez. It's showing me that it is in the customer domain. It's also talking through that it has some tags and the service type and giving me that information. So if I was looking for a specific table, I'm just asking it to show me the customer table within the Postgres service. This is where you can add additional tags or filtering. If I maybe wanted a specific tag like I have here, it would be able to identify those things for me. Now, I'm starting to understand this table, but now if I wanted to do something, I would have to come here and potentially write a SQL. But really what I want to do is I want to really understand this country and state, because I know this data somewhat. I'm a data analyst here, and I'm thinking, okay, let's see why we have even a country code. I thought everything had to be the US. I can now say, hey, perform an analysis in Postgres to show me the distribution by country and state. So it's going to run a SQL statement on this table that I see here. And if I do look at this data, I see the 21 or so rows. Everything is country, everything is state. Now, 21 rows is not the data volumes that you guys probably see. It is small time, but hey, it's threw it up together over the weekend. It's good enough for a demo. This would work on 21,000. You guys get the idea. But really, I'm understanding this without having this window open and just looking at specific elements of the platform. I wouldn't know that everything's in the US. And that makes sense. I know the business. I can then say, okay, this makes sense. I want to take this a step farther. I'm seeing USA, I'm seeing TX, CA, FL. It's giving me more information than that's actually here. Maybe nobody knows what CO is, or maybe nobody knows if MA is Massachusetts or Montana. Enriching this data, another benefit of just SQLing the data. So solving that problem of providing that context that MA is Massachusetts and PA is Pennsylvania, or my home state is Florida. Again, providing additional context is key, and Claude's doing that for us. Now, we want to capture the context that exists in a glossary term. So I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to go into glossaries. And I have a couple already, but I don't have anything for reference data. So I'm going to ask Claude to create a reference data glossary. And what this is going to do is going to create a glossary here called reference data, give it a nice description. You can have Claude be suggestive or actually execute. I have it to always allow and always execute because I don't want to waste any time having to. And it looks like it's successfully created. So then I refresh my demo instance here. And now I have that reference data glossary. So again, we weren't seeing that before, and now we have an empty reference data. Now, what do we need to do here? We need to create some glossary terms for the patterns we just saw in the data. So I'm going to ask Claude to create a country and state term in the reference data glossary. And maybe I should have specified the glossary here, but I think it's smart enough. I hope he hears that. So then when the robots rise against us, he knows I was nice to him. I should also be saying please here. Do use your manners when you're talking to Claude or any other agent. It's just polite. And now it's going to create the two glossary terms that I've asked, and it looks like it's successfully created both. So again, I'm going to refresh my screen here. And now I have reference data. I have country. It's a geographical country identifier, example US for United States. Currently, our customer base is exclusively US based, with all records showing USA as the country value. This field is critical for geographic analysis and reporting, and it captured what it saw in Postgres, that query we ran, and is actually taking the context it gained there and providing it into this glossary term. So I didn't need to make that deduction. I didn't need to type all of that out. It automatically deduced that for me and then entered it here. And I can chat back and forth with Claude and say, hey, I want it to be this or have it be that. Just keeping it simple for now, and even keeping it simple is providing me a whole lot of value and a whole lot of context here. So again, just to recap what we've done so far, we found that Postgres customer table based off X criteria that we had. We saw some of the insights from a tagging or the owner, that was Joseph Perez, myself. We also can see any other additional context surrounding it. Once we started to gather that context, we got curious, which is a great thing. We thought, what does this table actually look like? And instead of having to fire up DB Beaver and find this table again, we just asked Claude, hey, find for this table that we're looking at, query this with our Postgres extension, and get that data. So we were able to use Claude as a query engine to discover the analysis and trends that we were able to find earlier. And now we've created a governance element, kind of going to these steps for reference data. Now, I'm a big fan of governance, just like all of you. But governance doesn't actually enforce anything, does it? Just because I have a fun little glossary term that says we only use US values doesn't actually enforce it in the data. So now what we want to do is create a test for that reference data that we've just established. So let's create a test case on country column in our customer table so that the value must be USA. And I'm going to now have a test case created, and let me navigate back to that customer's table. And we're now going to see data quality. There's no test case yet. It's working on it. And what this is going to do is add a test case, hopefully to successfully created, to this customer table. And let me refresh, where the country cannot equal USA. So if this fails, then let me know. So what I've done here is tied everything together. Again, Collate's about unification, MCP is all about unification. Let's bring those two together. We've analyzed the data directly on Postgres. We've created that reference, and now we have a nice little test code with a description, the parameters, the strategy, and the SQL expression of what we're doing here. So now I'm enforcing that reference data that I've just created. I'm not just having a term for the sake of having a term. I love glossary terms. I love reference data management, but we need to actually enforce this. We need somebody to be the police officer in the speed zone of this reference data. And that is this test case. So from an end-to-end standpoint, we were able to discover the data. We were able to analyze it using Postgres. We've then created some glossary terms, and now we've created a test case. And we've done this all in a series of 10 or 15 minutes. So really powerful stuff. And then I can say, give me a quick recap of what we just did. And as it does that, I can look into the chat and see what questions we're getting, because I see that we have some. I see that some of the Collate team members are already answering some of these. So Johnson, maybe if you could have Beta come off mute just in case we want to dig into these as well a little bit
You
deeper,
got it.
as well as Mohit, so we can go a little bit deeper into the Q&A portion. And again, just to recap, a great thing to send to your manager after you perform these tasks, just copy and paste this to an email and say, hey, I've done this and this. And then you sign off early on a Friday afternoon because you've created some glossary terms, you created some test cases, and you found what you were looking for. So 15 minutes, now it's 10 o'clock here on the East Coast. I'm going to sign off and start my weekend a little early thanks to Claude and Collate. So really appreciate everyone's time, and we'll get into the QA portion starting from the top. If it's already been addressed in the chat, I'll graciously skip it just for the sake of time. But the first question was from Christian. Did you have to configure sample data for that data asset in order for the LLM to be able to execute SQL directly on the table? Yes, I did, but not within Collate. I have in my settings, developer, I have a Postgres extension that I've added to go directly to your data source. So it doesn't have to work through Collate as an intermediate. Having extensions is the whole purpose of an MCP server. You just don't want to have one, you want to have many. So this is really thinking about how we can go to Postgres, to Databricks, to all of your sources under the sun, and leverage a variety of different things. Was able to set this up pretty quickly off my local source that we're seeing over here. So this is just my Postgres database that it ran queries against that I'm running locally. Can the agent take long to answer due to the heavy context graph that it may have to ask? Says 2. Yeah, it really depends on the different type of model that you're using. And let me navigate out of settings into new chat. Depending on the model you're using, it depends on what's available. So we have Sonnet, Claude Opus 3, Haiku, which is pretty fast that we've seen for some of those bigger heavy lifting. For the sake of the demo, I really like Sonnet because it's a nice middle ground. It gave me a good bit of context. It was smart, but it also performed the actions in a specific way. Maybe in a future blog post, we can talk about each of these models and what we recommend for each of those tasks. But great question there. We also have a question from Giacomo. Similar answer to above, it seems. In this case, Collate MCP is not the one picking up the data. And yes, that is correct. So thank you. We're using a variety of these extensions in combination with one another because we don't want these things to be isolated. We want it to be Collate. We want it to be Postgres, depending on the action at hand. Claude is smart enough to realize the context and then pick the right one. So if I go back to those Collate MCP chats, we see if it has the little C, it's Collate, but then we see, oh, it's Postgres running a query, and that aligns perfectly with the connectors that we have, P for Postgres, C for Collate, and then if you click into these, we can actually see the different actions that Collate is able to perform. And notice I didn't have to say, specifically use this extension or use that. I just said the Postgres customer table so it wouldn't be confused, and it's able to take that context and run away with. I see Poet Mohit, thank you for answering. Nicholas, is there an additional cost? In Collate, yes, that is part of the Collate AI. So that's where we're able to see, does MCP have only one set of credentials or can it have different ones? It can have different ones. So if I go back into my settings and extension developer, excuse me, I'm actually specifying in here my authorization header. So that's using my specific personal access token. And then for Postgres, I gave it my username and password, which I will not show you because I did not obfuscate that whatsoever. And it's
Here,
local. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Pete.
yeah, sorry, Joe, before we go to the next one, if I may steal your screen for a second. I would
Yes, let
really like
me.
to, there we go, on the architecture that we're following here for the MCP. So I'm sure that you all have been playing, or likely have been playing, with all of the MCP tools and toys that there are around in the internet. And I'm sure that you saw that most of them actually play via this STDIO transport protocol. So this basically means that, hey, if I'm using Claude or Goose, Cursor, whichever kind of tool that I want to use to connect to the MCP, I need to make sure that this MCP server lies in my laptop as well, so that the client, Cursor, Goose, whichever, can directly talk to the MCP server. And that's good for some cases. For example, Joe was showing also that, or at least it caught my eye that, Joe, you also have that MCP about control my computer, right? Maybe you want to ask the MCP, hey, list me the files that I have in the documents folder. So in that case, it makes sense that you do need that MCP server available on your laptop. But when we are talking about these generic SaaS platforms, such as Collate, in this case, you don't really want for everyone in your organization to actually have to deploy and host the MCP server just for that to be interacting with Collate, right? Instead, what you want is to have one single MCP server so that different clients, like yourself, your colleagues, different kind of personas, maybe you're an engineer and you might know how to configure that. But if we jump into a business analyst user, they might not really have the right tooling or even the right permissions in their laptops to actually perform these connections. So the architecture that we're following for the MCP in Collate is this HTTP-based MCP server, and we are deploying it as part of Collate server itself. And if we look a little bit deeper on how this works, is that the client is going to have to talk to the MCP server with the same authentication layer that you would use if you were directly talking via the API. And that's actually a super powerful architectural foundation that we're following here, because Giacomo, you were saying also, does it mean that if I'm using the MCP, all of the users are going to be looking at the same things? They are not, because each of these users, when they are configuring their Claude, Cursor, Goose, or any other clients, what they will have to do is go to their Collate instance, check their profile, and here basically pick up their access token. So in this case, I'm connecting with my user. I'm going to take a token that represents my user so that any of the actions that the LLM is going to take, it's going to take them on my behalf. It's going to take them based on the permissions of my user. Because if we keep zooming down here, so the MCP allows us for the LLM to connect to the server, but then this set of tools that we have developed as part of the MCP server, these capabilities that Joe was showing about fetching some entity details or creating glossary and the glossary term, all of these tools, they are also behind this role-based access control that safeguards, that has these guardrails around any other API call. So in the end, in this case, as my user, when I'm using Claude, I'm going to be having the same permissions that I would have as my user. And maybe I do have these permissions to create a glossary term, but someone else in my team, they are not allowed to do that. So even if they try to execute that tool from the MCP client, they are really not going to be able to do that piece. And that's why we really try to nail this architecture. And its benefits are, first of all, the same kind of role-based access control and authorization layer that we follow for any other APIs. On the other part, also, we are embedding the MCP server as part as the OpenMetadata server or the Collate server, depending on which version you are. But basically, you don't need to host and maintain any other piece of infra. You already have everything that you need right there in your server. And the final part is this knowledge graph here. So if you play with open metadata, if you play with Collate, we're able to ingest information about the metadata, right? Your tables. Then you can bring the glossaries and terms. You can add some owners, you can add reviewers, and all of these entities, all of these assets that you have in the platform, in the end, they have certain relationships. They do not live in isolation. A table on its own, it does not really add any value. A table adds value when you can see the big picture and from where it comes from, where it's going, who is owning it, how is it being used, and whatnot. This kind of greater context is what really allows us to extract the value of these pieces. On these tools that we are developing in the open metadata, on the open metadata server or on the Collate server, it's not that we are just exposing the APIs that are there, because the APIs are there, you can use them, right? It would not make sense to just expose the APIs in just in a different flavor. What we are doing here, it's really adding all of this context that this knowledge graph has, all of these relationships, how it is that for creating a glossary term, you might need to have a glossary, making the LLM really aware of this metadata standard that it's powering open metadata and Collate's foundations, so that whenever you're interacting via the client, you get all of this added value on top of it. Now,
Thank you.
Joe,
Thank you, Bede.
I'll get
I
back to
know.
you, but since we had a few questions that were going about this authorization and whatnot, I believe that it really made
Absolutely.
sense just to touch
Yeah.
base a bit on the architecture.
Absolutely. I really do appreciate that. And again, just to drive home, it's this personal access token. So it's only going to have access to what this persona with these roles are able to do. So by leveraging that token, you're leveraging that user's permissions and things of that nature. So this API will block any action that they're not able to perform. So I think based off some of the questions we hit and some of the questions that Bede just addressed from the architecture, we have hit a good amount of questions within the chat, if not all of them in one shape, one way or another. I did see some comments on open metadata versus Collate and what's available. So as Collate does have additional features like our knowledge center or like our AI or like our anomaly or like our natural language search, the Collate MCP will take advantage of those specific features that aren't available to the open metadata MCP. So it's really the actions it can perform are going to be within the scope of Collate versus within the scope of open metadata. So I hope that provides additional context, but Mohit, thank you for addressing that into the chat. And also, I have some time to stick around, so if anyone wants to share how they're using MCP and Collate or MCP and open metadata, throw it in the chat, or we could even have you come off mute to share your experience. Also, any feedback from my demonstration or things you want to see in our episode in 2 weeks, let us know, and we will try to accommodate that in our future 30 at 30 Collate specials.
Looks like we have no further questions.
Alrighty. As always, thanks for the continued support and really happy to see these episodes grow more and more. Feel free to reach out to us, connect with us on LinkedIn, YouTube, other social media platforms. And if you are curious, definitely reach out. This recording will be available most likely by Monday. Our great marketing team likes to edit and make me sound a little bit better, removing all my filler words and things like that. So YouTube's even better than seeing it live, but really do love the live feedback. Alrighty. With that being said, I think we could end it here. Again, have a great weekend. Thanks for joining from around the world, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks' time. Take care.